Hello, my name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live usually every Thursday, but I have a special show for Tuesday because we get one side of the story in the United States about the situation in the war or special operation, depending on who you ask, between Ukraine and Russia. Oh, let me turn off. Uh, and we get one side of the story, and I just want the people to have more sides of the story, especially because we're levying sanctions in our name. I'm in the U.S. right now in Athens, Georgia, so we're levying sanctions in our name, and we're giving guns to people. And that's the latter thing is what worries me because we're not giving guns to necessarily the best people. I worry, and I think this is a real worry that however this shakes out, eventually the guns we give to the people in Ukraine are going to end up being part of some sort of internal purge of like either Russia sympathize or like this doesn't end well. Usually when we give guns to people in 15 years, those same guns end up doing things that we don't want them to do. And then we pretend that we're dumb or naive in when we do it. So like, I just worry that the guns we give will not end up in the right places, in the right times. And so like that's really what got me thinking about the Ukraine situation as soon as we started arming one side. And then when I started to understand that that one side isn't really known for like some sort of long-term vision that accords with my understanding of justice. And I'm talking about, the rabid neo Nazi faction. So I brought in an expert, not an expert, I just a regular guy in Moscow who thinks about things, and just like I'm a regular guy in the US who thinks about things, and we're going to solve the world's problems. And I think we're going to learn a lot about what is and is not true of Russian political life, right? So I'm going to bring Egor into the stream.
Hi.
Hello.
Tell me again how do I pronounce your name, and then I'll tell you how you pronounce my name.
Okay. You pronounce my name Irony. Irony.
Irony. My
Yes.
name is Yegor.
Oh,
Yegor.
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 It's not Igor. Yes, that's completely different name of the completely different roots. So, and it's actually a different name. There is a Nordic name Igor in Russia, and there is Greek name Yegor in Russia. So kind
Oh,
of different kind. So different things. Okay. Anyway, Irony, right?
right. So here's the deal.
Right.
What we're told about living in Putin's Russia is that you can't talk. It's very like authoritarian. There is no freedom and you can't express yourself. You cannot be alternative to the Russian party line. And if you do, at any point in time, you can be, disappeared. But then I went and I did a little bit of research, just like looking around in Russia, and there's like 10 seasons of The Voice. And so like there's like all of this kind of low culture that means that there's actually a lot more expression than like both at the low and the high level than we're taught. So what's the truth about political expression and just expression of ideas just as just a Russian national?
Well, I would say that The Voice probably is not the example that I would call an example of freedom. This is an example of a cultural expert that helps to keep people asleep. I mean, working class asleep, collective consciousness asleep. So this is like, I don't know, fast food, culture of fast food and Marvel movies. And don't get me wrong, I love me some good American blockbuster, but this is not when you have like American stuff like movies, voice, reality TV, and so on, and even iPhones in your pocket. Exactly those things that we are being threatened right now by being taken away from us. This is not the signifiers of freedom in any way, actually, or even richness, because most of the people who can afford to buy iPhone in Russia can afford it only by taking a loan for this. So it's quite the opposite of the thing that your favorite intellectual Dave Rubin once said, that if you have an iPhone in your pocket, you cannot be oppressed. This is actually the tool of oppression. And it been taken away. One of the first things that was with sanctions was taken away or threatened to be taken away from us is iPhones. Like these iPhones you keep in your hands right now, this is the last iPhone you'll ever have. So if this is a freedom of tool, how can tool of freedom, how can you threaten us to take our freedom from us just by taking our iPhones from us? This does not make any sense. This is iPhones, voice, and so American TV, American culture in a broader sense. This is exactly tools of oppression, not in oppression, literally oppression, because they obviously serve as a certain relief, as an open for the masses. Exactly the same purpose as religion serves in original Marxist definition of the opium of the masses. He wasn't actually anti-clerical in his definition religion of the as the opium of for the masses. He was actually very sympathetic to religion, but he understood its main function of religion. And you can see it in playing out throughout the history that to relieve the pain of the masses, pain from oppression. And when people say that we're taking this thing from you, like iPhones or latest release of Hollywood movies, they are saying that we're not taking tools of freedom from you. We are saying that now we are gonna make the horror of you meet the horror of neoliberal world order without any painkiller. That we also we're providing for you for your money. So that's but on the other hand, the notion that in Russia you have no freedom is largely true, but there is important I don't know, there are rules, and there is it's a spectrum. Of course, Russia less democratic than the United States, but I wouldn't call the United States a democracy. And I'm fully aware that when I criticize American democracy, I'm talking as a Russian from Russia. I'm not saying that like Russia have a comparable democracy to the United States. It's definitely much worse. But democracy is not as a hard concept to understand.
Right.
It's much harder concept to implement. It's one person, one vote, and majority decides. And if we look into like, I can from my heart, from my head, from top of my head, I remember like dozen of policies that for many years supported by majority of Americans, and they have no chance to be implemented anytime soon.
Exactly.
So no democracy here, but of course you have a much bigger, much closer to democratic state than Russia is. We're not completely undemocratic, but we're much far on this way to democracy than you are.
So I was looking at the State Duma, which is the legislative body, and the breakdown. And so while I see here that the Russian National Party has an overwhelming majority, there are spaces for dissenting votes, which means that you can dissent without being thrown into a prison. Or
no, there is no dissenting voice right now. I mean, we have like 4 parties monopoly, like you have 2 parties duopoly over power. I mean, the whole body of 450 people. Since Putin got elected, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parliamentary elections, I believe, and each time Duma was taking bigger over stronger control by presidential administration. So basically each seat, and you can safely say that since 2016, so previous election and the latest election was 2021, so last year, that at least 2 latest Dumas, each seat out of 450 was approved by the presidential administration, each one. So there is no dissenting voices. They are completely under control of Kremlin. Completely. This is as they show as much diversity as your Congress. I mean, in terms of ideology, they are completely beholden to the Kremlin.
And there's this notion among Americans that Putin kind of took over Russia without any influence from the US, and that we're not at all responsible for the rise of Putin. And
See,
this is
yes.
what's bothersome to me, because in my independent studies, it seems that without the US, you don't get Yeltsin, and then without Yeltsin, you don't get Putin. So there's a way in which without the US, who knows if Putin would be in charge right now? Am I wrong, right? Or what am I getting wrong? What's going on?
Partially wrong, partially right. I mean, you definitely get Yeltsin without US. He was raised in the Soviet Union nomenclature class, so he was making his way at the very top. And the person of Putin, you definitely got without any influence of United States.
Okay.
But the broader conditions that defined Yeltsin's presidency,
Right.
defined a particular choice of this figure like Putin, not Putin per se, and conditioned Putin presidency, that these conditions are, of course, the broader responsibility for them lies on the West, collective West, and it's very simple to understand, because I mean you can see. I noticed that often that right wing and left wing worldview often points at the same problems, but right wing, let's say, right wing tends to see this like premeditated thing. So there is definitely a worldwide oligarchy class that controls our world in broader sense. But when you see the signs of it, if you, let's say, educated not very well, you would imagine that there is literally some kind of secret society, and people do it in coordinated fashion in some secret places. When you educated better and you became a leftist, you understand that it's basically coincided interests of the different people from different countries, make them operate as the singular body in some sense. Even if they are competing with each other, they still have their broader interests that define their politics. And same thing with the politics of Russia. It was defined by the broader conditions that were set by the West, because Russia, Soviet Union, I should say, in one way lost Cold War, in another way didn't. It lost Cold War as an economic and political struggle. So it lost in the way not the West won per se, but Soviet Union inside of itself lost the belief in the idea that was driven the struggle, the idea of communism and socialism and so on. So it was a disappointment on our part, Soviet part. So we lost this.
So this notion that,
in,
real quick, so the notion that the culture of Russia right now is socialist or communist or is the same
yes, it's
culture.
completely ridiculous. Yes,
It's completely ridiculous. So that's what I.
It's
so the culture of the culture of Russia today and the culture of Soviet Union in 1977, two completely different cultures, or like what's going on?
well, there is, of course, some continuation, because many of the people that were alive in the 70s or young in the 70s are in power now.
Right.
But it's continuation in the sense that those people who were young in the 70s got, in the young age, completely disappointed in the idea that was driving their parents. And it created an ideological vacuum in their heads. And they thought that the West is able to fill this vacuum with some better ideas and provide better outcomes. Unfortunately, the West, at the same time, was taken over by neoliberalism and Thatcherism and Reaganism. So you really didn't send us your best.
No,
you send us Thatcherism, you send us Reaganism, you send us neoliberalism at the moment of the mental weakness collective mental weakness, I should say, when people were looking at you and they were looking at you at your best, like this 1960s American dream, when one working person could feed the whole family, right? This dream dissolved in your country as well. So right now, it is in the best circumstances, the same level of welfare that could provide one working person in the family, now provided in middle class because two people, two parents working. And the middle class shrinking because poor people class growing because the most of the wealth coming up redistributed on top. So basically, we got bought into idea that started that were existed in the 60s and already started fade away in the 80s, 90s with your neoliberal reforms, and we bought this outcome from the past, took your reforms from the present, 80s, 90s, neoliberal reforms, and got where we got there. And as a observer, keen observer of American politics, I could say that because in a way we started from scratch and adopted your neoliberal ideology and not in a Reaganist form, more in the Clintonite form. In the 90s, you can see in a way your future. If you imagine, let's say, what would it could like if, which is possible future, by the way, if in 2 years you have a Republican president, a Republican Congress, both chambers, of course, Republican Supreme Court, and most importantly, Republican majority in the most states of the country. So you have complete political control. Look forward, like in 5-10 years ahead of, if the situation stays static, like in Russia, because Putin became this Putin right now, not overnight. It was 15 years of transformation.
Okay.
So imagine 2024, when let's say Trump or DeSantis or whoever else becoming president, you have complete Republican control over the United States. And imagine they managed to keep this. So this charade with two capitalist parties changed order, it stops completely because it was sustainable for decades, but it's becoming unsustainable right now because of the growing level of inequality. It doesn't work, simply doesn't work. So imagine that Republican managed to keep the White House in 2028, 2032, and they keep majority each election cycle in the Congress. In 10 years, you will see what we saw in Russia 5 years ago.
Right. For those at home, the American South might actually be a pretty good analog because the Republican Party is in control of the state legislature here onto the future. There's going to be a standing Democratic minority, mostly made up of the Black residents in the South, and it'll only ever get up to 40%. And it will never get close to 50%. So it'll always be a standing minority. There's Republican rule at the state legislature. And yet, we kind of muddle on pretending that it's going to be competitive, but at the state level it's not going to be competitive.
Well, I should say that the Russian scenario, Putin scenario, is the worst case scenario. I mean, there is always best case scenario, worst case scenario, and middle case. So I describe a worst case scenario that I don't believe for many reasons will work out in your case. So it's that there's something that you should be aware of. So you should understand what you're fighting against. And you should understand that the thing that why this scenario worked out in Russia, because after the fall of the Soviet Union, we have and shock therapy reforms, we had destroyed economy, we had again destroyed ideology, so people didn't have an idea what they are here for, what we should strive for, what kind of society we should build right now. So we just copy pasted the first idea that seemed credible and legitimate, and it was a wrong idea to copy paste. First, simply neoliberalism, then American conservatism, with when you have oligarchy and cultural conservatism at the same time. So it's because Russia was in uniquely weak position
ideologically. ideologically, like a vacuum.
Ideologically, economically, and we
Yes.
didn't have any strong democratic institutions that could soften the blow.
And we didn't actually put we didn't, so in the reforms in the 90s, we didn't push building democratic institutions. We pushed privatize some of the state industries, create an oligarchic class. Like, I don't remember Clinton and Yeltsin talking about how are we going to build democratic institutions in Russia. I do remember a lot of talk about privatizing some of the state industries. Is that true?
Yes. I mean, but you eroded a lot of your democratic institutions, but you still have capital to waste. That's the difference with Russia. So we didn't have much capital to waste in that sense. So we got to the conservative dictatorship pretty quickly. You, on the other hand, I don't believe you will. So I describe this the worst case scenario that Republican dictatorship from top to bottom starting 2024, which is possible. But on the other hand, you have another often overlooked factor of the historical process. It's generational change, and you have, as well as we are, your boomer generation dying off, and millennials, who are, and the majority are much more left-leaning, socialist-leaning in their intentions, will become the biggest voting group, just because when people getting older, we are getting older as millennials. I'm a millennial. We are voting more, and the older people who are vote more just dying off. So there's less people to vote on their part. So you have
the problem,
this
real quickly.
Opposite move. Yeah.
Yeah, the problem with assuming a generational change is without democratic institutions, it doesn't really matter how popular you are. You can still be alienated from real power in government because there's no conduit.
Yes.
Like
that's what happened in Russia. That what happened in even worse form in Belarus a year ago when Lukashenko by all means lost the election, and the whole country knows that he lost the election. So there is always levels of bad that people who right now paint in Russia and even Putin's Russia as the ultimate bad, they are completely wrong. Because when I'm saying that Russia is the worst case scenario of USA, Belarus is the worst case scenario of Russia, and it still is not the worst case scenario possible, even in this day and age. So I'm saying that they were able to completely lose the election. They were able to have opposition candidate Tikhanovskaya, I don't remember her name, Natalia. I'm not sure. Tikhanovskaya. Yes, so they have opposition candidate to coordinate around. The whole country knows that she won, that Lukashenko remaining in power is completely illegitimate, but yet he still was able to keep himself in the chair because of a sheer police force. Simply police force, brutal repression, nothing else. So of course, electoral ways have their limitations, but I'm saying that American electoral system is much stronger than Russian. And the last election with this whole stop the steal conundrum, actually, for me, it was an exciting development because I did not know how good the system of your counting votes, in this part particularly. I mean, you understand that democracy is not about counting votes only, but this part of your system is apparently impeccable.
Yes.
It was proven by dozens of courts that
the transition of power. We get the transitions of power really well. Like that's
I mean, I actually wrote an article in Russian right after this whole history before January 6th that we should definitely copy your system of electoral system when each state count their vote votes on their own because they are motivated to count it correctly because it represents their state.
Good.
Instead of Russian centralized voting system that can be controlled from Kremlin. So your system demonstrated and proved itself. I didn't know how good it is until Trump and Republican Party put it to the test in 2020. And the result, they found like literally few examples of voting fraud, and almost all of them was on the Republican side. And almost all of them were ridiculous, like a man voted for his wife and himself. This kind of stupid voting fraud. So it shows me that your system in this part works well. And I can
our votes are counted locally and then at the state level and then certified at the state level, then sent to national. So there are many checks internally to
but
that.
The most important thing that I can deduce from comparison from Russian thing that you don't have a central electoral office. You have dispersed offices in each state of the country, and this thing would work definitely cool for Russia, because we also in Russia have not all region of Russia, we call it oblast, similar as your state. Not every oblast in Russia votes similarly. There are more authoritarian oblasts, there are more democratic oblasts who vote in defiance of Kremlin, but because it's all controlled by the Central Electoral Commission from Moscow, it doesn't really matter. But if you copy your system, it will work much better, because the particular state have all the incentive to send their own elected representative, not the representative that was dictated from the center. So in that sense, I believe in your democracy much more. So you have a strong electoral system, you have a generational change, you have much better situation in terms of freedom of speech, and it doesn't work well right now because of establishment media. But again, establishment media, their main audience is boomers.
Right.
I'm sorry for this word. When boomers are out of the picture for natural reasons, the establishment media, they don't have and probably won't have a similar grip onto the next generation, millennials. So they won't be able just transfer their cultural grip onto the next generation, because the next generation is already controlled by another source of media, like Joe Rogan, Breaking Points, and other sources of media information, even TikTok, which I believe TikTok, I see TikTok in a very optimistic view, and believe TikTok is much better than mainstream corporate media. And the most important thing, I'm actually serious about it, but I'm not going to make my case right now, maybe sometime other, but I believe that
TikTok for the people.
Yes, TikTok for the future of people. I mean, it's a tool of collectivization that unseen in history. Collective action through TikTok. People, I mean, it's stupid in many ways, but because it's for children. But children will grow up and learn collective action will stay with them. I mean, I also had very stupid interests when I was 14. I had stupid interest when I was 25. So I have no problem with people doing stupid action on TikTok, as long as it's collective action and they're acting as a generation, which is unseen in the history of humanity. I'm very pleased by that, and I'm very optimistic about that. Oh, well, I made my case about TikTok right now. So I'm saying that your cultural institutions, political institutions like corporate media, they have no way to transfer the institutional power to the next generation. So we have these three facts: generational change, which is necessary but not enough. You have strong electoral institutes, and you have informational change. People, new generation coming with completely new and uncontrolled so far by corporations, media sources. So you have all the things that we need to be in place for the best outcome. So Russian scenario is the worst possible scenario. Best possible scenario, as you can guess, is socialist revolution, of course.
Right. But for that, you need to build the democratic institutions. Like
No, you have the body, you have the working mechanism of it. I mean,
no,
electoral
but you
mechanisms.
like in Russia.
Oh, in Russia, yes. I was talking about America because we were talking for American audience, and I see Russian example as a case study for America. I mean,
Right,
I see American case as a case study for Russia, but that's
right,
what I'm talking about with Russian audience. For you,
yeah,
I want to transfer knowledge in the opposite direction. So I'm
yeah.
talking about the worst case scenario as Russia being the worst case scenario to point out your strong sides, your weak sides, your strong sides,
Yeah.
and the probably optimistic outcome that we definitely collectively as a humanity should strive for, because I mean, without left-wing socialist revolution, I mean, not literally violent revolution, democratic revolution doesn't matter, because word revolution means radical change of
Right.
the formation. Without socialist revolution on the West, it's not possible to create sustainable socialist revolution for the
Okay.
rest of the world. We tried it 100 years ago. It turned out ugly, because under Western pressure, we went from the relatively soft and nice Lenin's new economic politics snap to the Stalinism, which was definitely harsh, but it also was conditioned by the situation that we have to oppose to the colonial power of the West that was
Right.
hell bent to destroy this
Yes.
experiment. So it made Soviet Union as militant as it was, unnecessary militant.
Yeah.
And this time we have much better historical circumstances to
Right.
go over past capitalism in much more peaceful and democratic way, because the conditions on the West
Okay. Good.
right now are much better. So I'm making so much point on your conditions, because I see the conditions for the socialist revolution in a good sense, post-capitalism revolution, let's say, so not to scare off some audience too much, post-capitalist revolution that are, I just listed them, very ready in USA, very ready in Europe, and that gives me the most hope for the future, let's say Russia, because right now we don't it's a big lie, coming back to the beginning of our conversation, it's a big lie to expect that the regime change in Russia,
Right.
even if it was possible right now, even if it happened somehow and somehow peacefully, like complete regime change in Russia and free election and Navalny wins as a president and so on, would drastically change the situation, because the problem, the situation in Russia is we have the same in Russia, whereas thin it rips. So Russia and this part of the world is the thinnest part of because of weak democratic institutions, thinnest part of the neoliberal world order. So it easily rips into violence.
Yes.
But it's the same fabric all over the place, all over the planet. So
So
it rips into.
real quick. So what you're suggesting is the sanctions that we're levying right now might actually be culturally regressive and actually retrench or make stronger the wrong kind of nationalism that's anti-democratic in Russia.
Well,
Because
that's what they do already, and
okay.
this is not like a sudden turn of events, because neoliberal policies, unchecked neoliberal policies, are eventually undemocratic, because they lead to growing inequality, and growing inequality destroys democracy. Because you can have, as I started, democracy is a very simple concept. It's very hard to implement, but it's very simple concept. And one of the two rules, it's one person equals one voice. And you can have equality of voice if you don't have equality of, or at least a comparable equality of income. If you have three people control same wealth as 50% of the people, so three people and 170 million people, you have three voices equal 170 million voices. So neoliberal policies eventually they are undemocratic. They lead to undemocratic outcomes. Neoliberal politics of the 90s was culturally liberal, but it was also economically liberal, and it led to Putinism. And cultural illiberalism of Putinism is just a cover for the late stage of capitalism, when you have to cover the growing inequality and point out direction of the people to somewhere else, to gay people, to West, to transgenders, and so on. So it's all a natural progression of the neoliberalism that built on the growing inequality. It's undemocratic progression. And when you have inequality passing a certain point, you can't even cultural means aren't enough to sustain this system. And this is the point when you go to fascism and you literally need to brown shorts to beat workers, so to keep them in place. So cultural wars are not enough. You need literally Pinkertons and brown shorts to keep status quo in place. So we had this in Russia already. And right now, neoliberal assault from the West, this economic warfare, it doesn't change just much. It just accelerates the process. So Russia, from the light proto-fascism of 2020, now going into hard Z swastika fascism of 2022. But it's not like we changed direction. We were going in that direction with the whole world. We are going in the same direction as America. It's just because of this economic assault and cultural and economic ostracism of Russia, it accelerated. But again, you don't look at Russia as something that diverts from your course of history. You're looking in the future of your course of history, because even if somehow it will be impossible, it won't work. And I believe that neoliberalism in historic terms, not like in years, but in maybe decade or so, is close to an end. But even if you somehow were able to completely separate yourself from Russia, like said it into another dimension, you wouldn't separate yourself from the problem that was in your system.
Exactly.
So in 10 years, you would have a 2016 kind of proto-fascism Russian in America, in Germany, in France. And in 10 years later, you have 2020 Russia in USA. So it will be, it accelerated in Russia, but it doesn't mean that Russia is going different way. It's going the same way as the rest of the world under neoliberal world order, but much faster. And you can, and I believe that one of the reasons why the neoliberal elites trying to divorce themselves from the Russia so fast, it's kind of Dorian Gray kind of situation. They are afraid to look at their own picture because they see what they've done. I hope you got the reference.
So, yeah. So I'm just thinking about the internal kind of cancer that neoliberalism kind of imparts. You see fully metastasized.
It's inequality. It's as simple as that. It's all boils down to economics. The economics boils down to equality or inequality of outcomes. So we all put the relatively same amount of labor in the economic outcome. I mean, some people more talented, some people less talented, some people more lazy, some people more productive. That's all true. But we all still have our differences, on which the conservatives point out correctly, but our differences are human differences. So on a human level, I can produce at best, maybe best worker could produce best star in any kind of production, could produce like 10 times more outcome than 100 times more outcome than the worst worker, less productive member of the society. But it's still not million times.
Right.
So you can't justify a million times difference.
And you just need to take problem. Right. Well, you got to take seriously that you can't have a functioning democracy with like with inequality that is predatory.
Yes, and that everything comes from that. So the base is basically we all collectively work. We produce collective economics is a result of our collective labor. But when how you distribute the fruits of this labor is matters. More equal the distribution. It's still maybe unequal on a personal level. Like a bottom line worker might take 10 times lesser wage than top executive, right?
But not 10 million times, not 100 times.
Not that million times. More equal is this, then more equal your relationship in the society, and closer to democratic you are, because there is no people who may have ungodly amount of control over social relations. Further going down economically in redistribution, more unequal redistribution, more unequal immediate relationships, then it gets exacerbated through generational wealth. When you started off with the different positions in society, sometimes incomparable positions in the society, and also translates into political institutions. So you have like 10 people or 1% of the people who have 90% of representation, and 90% of the people who have 1% of representation. And also, so it's quite a straight line if you understand the steps from the economic inequality, how it goes down to fascism.
I have a question. So you said that even in Belarus is like even a darker example of the alienation between
worst case scenario of Russia, yes.
So you're suggesting it really doesn't matter if the people support the special operation, if the oligarchs support. Does it, like, how responsive does Putin have to be to like the masses?
Well, the thing is that special operation became possible exactly because for last 20-25 years they built a system that completely unresponsive to population. But it was built for last 26, 27 years. It all started, I mean, I can lay down the history, main milestones for you. So 1991, Soviet Union dissolves, 1992, shock therapy and first reforms, 1995.
Real quickly, when you talk about shock therapy, you talk about the ideological vacuum.
No, I'm talking about economic liberation of prices without without any kind of
any type of support
for poor. Right. So inequality started right there. So in 1995 there was a loan for shares scheme that created oligarchs, and it was the class of oligarchy was created in Russia with explicit goal to help President Yeltsin win this his second term in 1996, because this shock therapy, of course, it shocked Russian population. They saw that well, they were expected like house in suburbia, own car, one man working, and whole family happy, like in old TV shows. Instead of that, they got abject poverty. That was so they got the assortments in the magazine, the supermarkets, but no money to afford any of it. So rating of Yeltsin was extremely low. It was extremely high on the hopes when in 1992. It was extremely low in 1995. Okay. They were losing. They were afraid of losing. There is no way to check right now were they losing or not really, but they were afraid, legitimately afraid of losing the presidency second term to communist leader Gennady Zyuganov, who was well, he was no Stalin, let's say. I mean, he was no danger actually to return of the worst times of the Soviet regime, but they were afraid, and they created the class of big property owners, oligarchs, with explicit goal. They should fight for the property, and in order to fight for the property, they should fight against communists, communists back in power. So they prop up our Yeltsin's regime, and that what has been done. So
and that was with the support of us, right? Or did we? Because
yeah, of course, it was intellectual support, roadmaps, ideas how it's supposed to be done, economic ideas, neoliberalism. It was heavily provided by Clinton's administration, and I don't say
right.
that it was in any kind of malevolent doing, because they provided us with the best shit they got, the same policies that implemented in United States of America. So the intention was the best. The policies were scrappy ones. So but that's why I'm saying that you're looking into your future, because the same policies that were implemented in the 90s in your country was implemented in my country, but we have just so much worse starting point. So we got to the bad and worst outcome much closer and much further than you are, but we are going to trajectory. So first, so you can see that regime
In 1995, you have the loan for shares program.
even pre-Putin's regime was created with explicit goal to divorce majority of people from power, because majority of people in 1996 would elect a communist president. Majority of people in 1995 Duma elections, parliamentary elections, elected majority of Communist Party.
Oh,
so yes. So in 1995 we had a majority Communist Party with Yeltsin as president in his second term.
okay.
So they have the next step of the project, of the liberal project in Russia, was to fight communists in parliament. So they managed to keep presidency, which was important because Russia by constitution is a super presidential republic, so managed to keep presidency with the help of newly created oligarchs from communists, but they still have defined oppositional, largely leftist parliament. So in 1999 was another election when there was anti-communist party created that was later became One Russia party, that right now dominant party. And you can say that anti-democratic project, it was anti-democratic project from the beginning, from the 1995, because they saw that democracy, pure democracy, when majority gets to vote, they of course justify it like majority is stupid, they don't know what they need, they don't know what they want, but no matter the justification, when you say that you know better than the majority, you become an authoritarian, even if you dresses up with gay rights and so on. So this whole cultural liberal agenda will be washed off by economical circumstances really quick anyway. So it doesn't really much use of it. So it was explicitly anti-democratic project from the beginning, but it was an oligarchic project. Oligarchs chosen, destroyed popular, you'd say populist candidate, one of the populist candidates to be successor of Yeltsin, Boris Nemtsov, who was killed later in 2015. They destroyed him through controlled by oligarchy media, so maybe sounds familiar. It's kind of he was no socialist by no means, but it kind of Bernie Sanders situation. Oligarchs control media. They destroyed more populist, although still liberal, but more populist candidate like Boris Nemtsov. They chosen one of the fractions chosen Putin as a successor, the like empty vessel for their will, completely empty vessel. He was no ideological, he was no politician, he had no prior ideas how Russia should be. So they thought this is they thought this is the great the best option for them, so they could rule again through Putin. That was the greatest mistake, because you can, when you put I'll explain later why, but it was the greatest mistake. They thought that the ideologically empty head, like person who have no prior understanding, idea, even stupid one.
I want to force you to be clear on this. So you're saying that Putin in the 90s, in late 90s, early 2000, not ideologically committed to anything except, and that's why he was picked. He was picked because...
Exactly. I mean, he was parroting liberal talking points, but again, he was parroting them, being former KGB agent, not because he was committed to liberalism, but because everyone around him, his bosses, people who he worked for last 10 years, was saying this. So he believed in this. Like before, he believed in communism. This is important stuff that people from secret services like KGB, CIA, any kind of services like that, and they are inherently undemocratic, because people who work there, they are mandatory ideologyless, even if they work for ideological government like US government or Soviet government, they should not believe in any ideology in order to execute their job, because oftentimes what they do in their work, like CIA does, like KGB did, is goes against any kind of values that declared by the government. So you have to have people in this job. It's the kind of the job that selects people who have no ideological stream, even wrong in stupid ideological beliefs. They should not have anything. So oligarchs saw the opportunity, so they saw this empty vessel who will just parrot the talking points of his bosses in Putin, and they installed him. So the first stage of Putinism, pre-Putinism, Yeltsinism was already anti-democratic, explicitly anti-democratic, because I mean democratic will was clear to take back unfair privatization, roll it back and restart it, and not to let oligarchy thrive. So first stage of the project, first 10 years, 1995 to 2004, 2003, was oligarchic stage. It was already anti-democratic, but oligarchs were still in power. But then, when they put Putin in power, the choice and psychological level played a cruel joke with them, because put yourself on a second in the shoes of the person who was not remarkable by any stretch of imagination, who quite recently, I believe, said that in the 90s, in the lowest point of his career, he was thinking of becoming a taxi driver, like Uber, but like free taxi driver. There was no Uber. Like just rolling around on roads and taking passengers for rubles, right? So now imagine any typical taxi driver from your city, and imagine this this person getting unlimited presidential power in dictatorship like Russia. And imagine what kind of ideas he's gonna get. So of course, Putin very quickly acquired the chosen one complex, because again, he never was political. He didn't show any even stupidest, even wrong ideas of how country or world should be.
Right.
And in spite of that, he became the person on par with not only Boris Yeltsin, but with the Soviet gangsters, with Russian Tsars. He got to continue their line. So from the Ivan the Terrible through the Peter the Great, through Lenin, through Stalin, and then comes Vladimir Putin. So
with no ideological commitments about how government should work.
when you realize it takes time to realize. It's like, getting weight. You get weight, then you realize that you actually got fat. It takes years to actually realize it. I'm talking from my experience. So it took years for Putin to realize. It took. Don't worry, I lost weight again many years ago, so it's good and fine for me. But it was actually nice experience to understand that your immediate physical change in your reality and your mental adaptation and recognition of it's two different states that may be separate from each other for years. And in Putin's example, we see that getting in power, actual power, and realization that he get to continue this majestic line of leaders of Russia from the last at least 600 years, and be the only one for this time being leader of Russia. It took some time, but when he realized that, how he could justify it? Probably the idea was chosen by the higher power, because there is nothing in his life, in his actions, that would lead to him. He was chosen, but of course not by oligarchs, but higher power. So he couldn't be beholden to oligarchs anymore. He couldn't. He started acting like he was a chosen one in the Tsarist terms, so chosen by the God. And he started acting accordingly. And in 2003, there was first separation of his power from the oligarchic power when the biggest of them all, fattest of them all, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who controlled 20 billions worth of wealth at the time, was arrested for 10 years. And since then, and it took time, approximately 10 to 15 times, when the economical power of the oligarchs that led Putin in power was completely divorced from political power. And right now, if you can say that broad Russian population didn't have any power, political power over Russia for decades, oligarchy doesn't have political power over Russia, any political power, also for years, for many years right now.
Really?
So yes. So right now, those people, I cannot name any oligarch or group of oligarchs who would have any reasonable power over Vladimir Putin and his decisions, because for two reasons. Because he was cutting off them from power since 2003, when he arrested the strongest of them. Khodorkovsky put him in prison, but it was still part of the oligarchic infighting. So some oligarchs got eaten, but another oligarchs like Abramovich got stronger of it.
I have a question about that. So how do the oligarchs handle the sanctions? How are they? I mean, they're oligarchs, so like they'll be rich no matter what. But are they causing trouble, or is Putin completely emancipated from them too now?
Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about, because sanctions came about in two waves. And first wave was after annexation of Crimea in 2014, when the first oligarchs was mildly hit by sanctions outside of Russia.
Okay.
Putin said, it was explicitly said to them, but it was translated as a message that everything that you lose outside of Russia will be compensated for you inside of Russia through broader distribution of assets, more governmental contracts, and so on. So, and again, it was like it was in 2000 when they elected Putin. It was like a bargain with the devil. So on the one hand, they got compensated from this mild hit of the sanctions. Some of oligarchs like Deripaska were hit stronger, some of them were hit weaker, but they were compensated in Russia, so all good. But on the other hand, the very fact that they were compensated by the government for the sanctions only increased the dependence on the government. So they understand, because of sanctions, they understood already then that their wealth is very much dependent on the Russian government. And right now, when they're getting, and at the moment, they already didn't have much political power. And right now, when they've been completely cut off and thrown out from the Western markets, and their property and their rights being limited, I mean, they're still fine. They're still flying all over the place. So it's not like they've been in any way really punished, but their power, of course, being reduced, and they realize that any chance for the good life and exceptional life of privilege that left for them lies within Putin's regime and personally Vladimir Putin, because yes. So if anything, I mean, it's twofold. First of all, they don't have many years. They don't have any actual power over Putin or influence over Putin. They simply don't. But even if they did, the actions of the West that were made to make them influence Putin in some way, the actions in the West actually scared them off under the Putin's wing, because what else they would do? Because the West said, no, we don't like you there, we don't want to see you there. So, okay, and again, any kind of compensation for the losses, but still having to keep their power and lifestyle and any privilege right now completely in the power of Putin. So it's I mean, I don't
Huh.
understand. I mean,
So,
I understand why. It's a different conversation, but I understand why West acting so stupid and reactionary. But it is stupid and reactionary. I mean, their justification: we should punish oligarchs so they what? I mean, there is no like second step in this
they what?
project.
Right. So
There is
what?
no. I mean, yes.
Real quick, it's allowed Putin to consolidate power because now the oligarchs have nowhere to turn, except under his authority. The
Now,
sanctions.
now his power actually being propped out from outside because he got control over Russian state for the
Right.
last 20 years. But simultaneously, because of the growing corruption and inequality, Russian state institutions were decaying. So the quality of the government control over the economics and politics was slowly decaying. But because of the economic, political, and cultural blockade around Russia, it gets like exoskeleton reinforced from outside. Because again, anyone who wish anything reminding previous status quo to keep in Russia right now don't have any escape but to Putin. Because they understand that with this iron curtain around Russia, there is if Putin falls, everything falls.
Okay.
So there will be no help for them from outside because they already outcast us from the outside, and there certainly will be no sympathy for them from the inside because people of Russia are politically underrepresented, but the hate for the ruling class is immense. So, and
So
they and that
I have a question about people's relationship to Putin. Have they just given up fighting and just assume, well, he's our guy. We can't contest him, so we might as well just love him as our dictator. Like, is there any of that going on, or
Well, I would say there are two opposite poles of
okay?
love Putin, hate Putin, and it's all that matter and how the spectrum, center of the weight is moving between those poles. So there is a love Putin, of course, segment. It's roughly similar in electoral terms to your core Trump base. It's around
Yeah, yeah.
30%. I believe it's also similar in terms of age and gender to Trump base, 30%, and older people. They formed parasocial relationships with Putin and people in power for the last 20 years because of the quality work of Russian propaganda. So Putin and some other names like Minister of Defense, Secretary of Defense Shoigu, and other people in power who were in front of their eyes for the last 20 years on the TV screens, they formed very strong parasocial relationship with them, and they it's to say that they did something wrong, something inhumane, or stolen something in order to enrich themselves, or kill something, or poison something, or start a war, is like to blame your closest relative.
Right.
So this, and again, you see this dynamic playing out with Trump. So this kind of people, they are lost, not because they are bad people, but because
Right.
they got into this net.
Right.
There is another pole is never Putin, never Putiners. You have never Trumpers, we have never Putiners. Same deranged liberals as yours. They right now
Professional
completely
class, elite, like professional class, college educated, but kind of snobby. Don't like working class people.
they call themselves global Russians. Global Russians.
Yeah, yeah.
Most of them are right now not global Russians. They are now foreign Russians because most of them are now outside of Russia. Almost
Oh,
none of them inside of Russia right now. The last big wave of immigration exodus is going on right now. And that's the people who are saying the world is black and white right now. There is only good and evil, and the evil, of course, Russia. they sometimes correct themselves and say that no, it's not Russia, it's Putin and Putin's regime. But by the policies they support, which are anti-Russian policies like complete economic blockade, you can say. And the good side, how they define the good side? They define the good side as the West. So the West is the good. The West is the Knights of Gondor with Aragorn and so on, and Russia complete murder, and we are about to have a last fight in the gates of murder. So the same, it's black and white right now. So and if you see who's white, on the white side, on the side of the Gondor, you see it's the West. So West have no sins. West have no sin. West have no problems of their own. And of course, Russia, by the logic of this black and white comparison, goes into murder state. So we are all orcs. So that's.
By the way, these people love Zelensky. They love Zelensky. They think Zelensky is some sort of
I have no problem with Zelensky. I actually respect Ukrainian democracy because they managed to elect their own presidents, and they have their own problems, of course. But at least they managed to change presidents for different ones.
That's true. It's better than Belarus.
And better than Russia. And I don't say that I agree with Zelensky on political level, ideologically, but when you have changing bad presidents, it's better than never changing good president. So, it's not Zelensky is not the problem here. I mean, this Zelensky's thirst is maybe a bit cringy, but that's not even like the 100th of the big problems of the world right now. So, actually, Zelensky, I would say, quite a good guy. I'm not sure I can say it. Living in Russia right now. I'm pretty sure there is a law that
I have a question about you. Have you ever been to Minsk? Have you been to Minsk?
I fled. I've been in Ukraine, actually. I traveled through Ukraine. I've been in Kiev. I've been in Kharkov, that right now sieged by Russians. I've been in Chernigov, that occupied by Russians. So, and I was flying through Belarus once or twice. So never been on the land of Belarus.
Because the idea is that under Putin's regime, the Ukraine would become another Belarus.
Possibly not. I don't believe it ever was possible that Ukraine would just fall under any occupying power. I mean, they ousted pro-Putin's candidates twice. In 2004, first Maidan, 2014, when he was already a president. So first they ousted. I mean, Yanukovych, the former president, is probably the biggest political loser in history because first he was ousted as a candidate. He almost won in 2014, but then there was Maidan, and third round of election was held, and he lost. Then years later, he finally won as a president, became a president. And yet he didn't manage to keep this term and was ousted as a president for the second time. I mean, the idea that he could be reinstalled the third time is ridiculous. the idea that Ukraine could be taken under control by any foreign power that doesn't really literally go full Nazi Germany on them, with full occupation and enslavement of the population with this explicit goal. So, like, literally Nazi Germany, not this stupid liberal comparison with Nazi Germany like got right now. Without this level of commitment and murderous intent, there is no chance that Ukraine will be subjugated. The worst case scenario for them, really worst case, maybe even worse than Belarus, is actually being destroyed like Libya. Failed state. So
because that's what it would take. They're not going.
I mean, in order to completely subjugate them, you need to invade force with the intent and power of Nazi Germany force in 1941. With a smaller force, but equally cruel intent, you can turn them into a failed state like Libya or Ethiopia, turn them into the state of constant civil war.
Right.
I don't think, happily so, that this is a real threat for them.
Right.
But I'm saying that the Belarus scenario is never the option for them, because the main problem with this Belarus scenario, because Belarus scenario wasn't implemented from outside.
Okay.
It grew out from the internal conditions. Like Putin, if USA or whoever else, or even China, would try to implement Putin from outside, we would never have Putin's regime. We would have anything but Putin's regime. But he grew out from inside the Russia, from our conditions, even influenced by the outside forces, but it was influenced by outside forces, but the conditions were our own, and he grew up inside of Russia. Lukashenko grew up to power inside of Belarus. So Ukrainians could only have any government, good or bad, that will grew up from inside the Ukrainian situation. It could be conditions of the situation could be influenced by Russia and by the West, but it couldn't be just put into power any kind of leader. So Russia, in any kind of circumstances, even the best kind of circumstances, as Putin probably imagined, we couldn't implement the Belarus scenario for Ukraine. It's impossible because Belarus scenario wasn't implemented for Belarus in the first place. It grew up from Belarusian conditions. So Ukraine, a different country, and they have the worst case scenario for them is continuous ongoing, never-ending war that separate part of the country from them, but any kind of peace will not be as Belarusian peace. But it still might be good or bad, because as much as reactionary forces from the West led to reactionary outcome in Russia in terms of Putin regime, Russia being in turn these reactionary forces leads right now to reactionary outcome in Ukraine. And the West doesn't help that much. I mean, again, I'm just on a personal level not comfortable talking about Ukraine because they're in state of war.
Right.
So any kind of criticizing them in the state of war. So it's more of a worry for me that behind this all liberal excitement around Ukrainian resistance and resilience, which is of course a very great thing in terms of nation building, but behind this all excitement, that's the thing that worries me, that all conditions, outside conditions, both assault from Russia and support from West, which is the worst of this, both of them lead to stronger reactionary outcomes. So Russia assaults Ukraine. That's unfortunately the fact. It leads to reactionary outcomes. But support from the West also reinforces reactionary forces inside of Ukraine. So there is more peaceful outcome for them, less peaceful outcome for them. But no matter how it goes, they will be much more right on the spectrum in coming years.
So it's suggested
which is not good.
It's suggested by our leadership that the sanctions won't be lifted until Putin is removed internally. That's what Biden is suggesting. I don't know, and I've heard it from other people in Washington, that these sanctions are here to stay until Putin steps down or the people remove him. And I don't see that happening. So are the sanctions felt as an attack against the Russian people, or are they felt as an attack against Putin, or is there really a difference between those two?
You don't have to. I mean, when there was those leaks in New York Times, like this guy Niall Ferguson, I believe, or maybe I'm confusing, in Bloomberg wrote that he got his scoop from Biden administration that they are really intended to regime change in Russia. From my view, I didn't need this scoop. I mean, it was obvious from the beginning. what they're leading for, what they're aiming for, because Russia is just, I mean, it's a pattern of behavior that goes back in history for decades.
That's true.
It's just that the targets growing bigger, so you have relatively small Cuba, North Korea for 70 years now, bigger Cuba and closer Cuba for 60 years, much bigger Iran for 40 years. And now you have very big Russia. So the pattern stays the same. Once sanctions, political sanctions are implemented, they are staying.
Right.
It's just the target getting bigger and closer to the motherland, metropolitan imperial center of the West. But they just, and it always goes the same. So they implement sanctions with the stated goal of this outcome desired. The outcome never comes, and they like shut the door and don't look this way anywhere anytime further. So just shut the door and forget about it. And they can shut the door on Cuba. They can shut the door on North Korea. It's much harder to shut the door on the Iran. They're trying, but it's still firing back. They tried it, still firing back. They can't erase Iran. And now they're trying to shut the door on Russia, and they didn't learn the lesson before. It's impossible to shut the door on Russia, not because of the Russia, but because of the place that Russia occupies in the international relationships, because of the much broader dynamics like the rise of the China, rise of the India, and the whole world tiredness with the Western dominance. So you weren't able to shut the door even on Iran. But they didn't learn the lesson because the difference of the power was big enough to ignore Iran. Don't notice Iran internally, don't allow Iran to affect their domestic situation. Right now, they aren't able to do this with Russia. Oil prices are growing and so on. And still, I don't overestimate the power of Russia or influence of Russia on the domestic situation in the West, because, of course, the sizes of our economies are incomparable. But the fact of the matter that they already feel small, relatively small pain inside, they will manage it. They will do things, so they will diminish this pain. But broader influence of Russia and the fact that propensity by the fact of existing of Russia and place that occupies geographically and politically and historically, they wouldn't be ever able to contain it, and it might be actually the final shot in the leg of the neoliberal world order. But what I'm saying that they were acting for decades the same way, and it was only expected that they will act the same way with Russia. It was expected for me as a person who studies history for years, for decades really. But for Russian people at large, or for Russian elites, it also was maybe not every one of them would put this as eloquently. Some of them would maybe provide wrong, in my view, justification for it. But the broader consensus in Russian elites would be exactly the same. That if sanctions will come, they will come for staying. Because again, we're not blind. We see Libya, we see Iran, we see North Korea, and it might hurt people's feelings to be in the same league of North Korea or Iran, because it was sold us as outcasts from the polite society, global society. But once we are put in this league against our will, we can see how it works, and of course it put us in the war-like situation. Elites, everyone really in Russia, because it's not only Putin's propaganda. In a way, Putin's propaganda came true. It became self-fulfilling prophecy, because he was acting for 20 years like West hell-bent to destroy Russia. And he was preparing Russian people to act on that. Now West is actually hell-bent to destroy Russia, and you could not explain or justify it in any other way. Sometimes more stupid people or more when the guard is low people say it quite part out loud. more like smart people are trying to blanket it, cover it even from themselves to light this thing out, but it's definitely going on. And if you read not statements of the people, let's say in articles or videos on YouTube, but the comments to these articles or posts on Facebooks, people who support the statements of the leaders, they say in the quiet part out loud that the goal is to erase Russia in any way from the human history. I mean, and it's emotional reaction. I don't think that they are, as Putin sold it for us, like born Russophobics and so on. I mean, it's stupid. But the emotional reaction, completely emotional. They didn't have mostly them a year ago, but the emotional reaction on the current events is so that it justifies all the bullshit that Putin and Putin's regime was selling to Russian people for 20 years. And right now, people who don't follow politics closely, so total majority of population in any country, they see, okay, we heard like somewhere that West doesn't like Russia, but we didn't pay much attention to it. Maybe it was all bullshit, whatever, politics. We follow politics, and right now, we see this. West literally cuts Russia in every possible way, cuts financially, cuts products, cuts supply chains, fires people from tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are now affected by the Western companies withdrawing their operations. People see it. They go in the malls and see that half of the stores are closed now.
Right.
They see that Visa and
these are
MasterCard.
And these are people who every day don't really think about politics. Don't really think about
exactly. But the Western assault economic warfare with Russia hit those kind of people. So those kind of people, they were oblivious to relationship with Russia and the West, and judging by the shops and the kind of shopping they could afford, the kind of goods they had access, kind of tourist destinations they could travel to, they were judging and fairly so that West and Russia are good between themselves. Right now, everything, this is exactly the things like type of goods, type of interactions, Western movies, and so on being cut. So again, judging by this very, very regular everyday stuff, they see that West and Russia is against each other. And of course, people start wondering what's going on. And basically only dominant narrative that accessible to them is the dominant narrative that was building up for 20 years, because every major paper in Russia, every central federal paper or regional paper, every major TV channel, every major original radio station, they are all saying this narrative that West are out there to get us, to destroy us. They didn't pay attention for that. Most of the people.
We're not out. That is a narrative. We're out to destroy Putin, or we're out to destroy you.
No. It's media controlled by Kremlin, Putin.
Right.
Of course, media on every level. The control of media, mass media in Russia, total on regional level, on federal level, TV stations, radio stations, major news resources. Yes, they all. For 20 years, no, not for 20, but for at least 15 years, straight, they're saying that West is out there to destroy us. Right. But most of the people, everyday people, didn't pay much attention to it, of course, for the last 15 years.
But now they can't ignore it
because there was no reason for this. Right. Life was going on as usual. Now, when life is drastically changing overnight, literally overnight in some cases.
They take it personal.
They are looking for. They are starting listen and looking for answers. What's going on? What's going on? Are we at war? And 99% of the message that affordable to them, accessible to them, is exactly that message that West is out there to get us. It's just for the last 15 years they didn't listen. because life was relatively well, okay, what was going on. Right now, they started to listen and they're starting to hear. And they're starting to hear exactly this message because the ears right now is open. So
Okay.
in a way, West forced people to pay attention to the political situations, but they didn't realize that people right now are paying attention to political situation. They won't listen what people say on MSNBC or Deutsche Welle. They would hear what being told to them on the Russian Первый канал, first
Right.
channel,
Right.
and Komsomolskaya Pravda, favorite Putin's newspaper. And
Right.
so they got Russian people attention, but they got it attention for Russian propaganda.
Right.
So right now, so I mean, you see, it's actually quite simple.
No, I like the idea that yes, the sanctions definitely got Russian people's attentions, but we don't control the content of the interpretation.
You don't control the narrative, and the attention goes to the Kremlin narrative. Kremlin narrative is the West is out there to get us to destroy Russia, and now the people first they are ready to listen, and second, everything that they see outside of them in the reality is actually proving this because yes, West in many ways explicitly against Russia and would like to see Russia like cut off from the earth and sent to another dimension.
Yeah.
Like already summoning Doctor Strange to cast the spell and send Russia to the other dimension. This is the last big Hollywood movie that we get.
So
if
you talk to the people in Washington about this, they'll tell you, no, we don't have a problem with the Russian people. We have a problem with the leadership. We have a problem with Putin. So they shouldn't take the sanctions as an attack against them and their livelihood. They should take it as a spur or some sort of something to get them to remove their leadership. But since we don't control the actual interpretation.
Well, Arami, I mean, as a regular guest on Rising and Breaking Points, you are well aware that your own political establishment lives in the bubble and they don't hear your own American people, what they need, what they want, what they think. So they're completely divorced from expectations and the reality of the majority of American people. It's just the same, but much worse for the Russian people. So they have their own image of how American people should, let's say, go and vote, and should they go vote for black woman of
Exactly.
woman of color, because it's woman of color, because they think for the liberal establishment it's the most progressive thing that should be, and if people don't vote for that and vote for some white old racist, they getting angry with these people. I mean, it's going on within your country,
right,
before your eyes for decades. So and now it's coming to Russia. Of course, they would have no idea. So they have this image how Russian people should react, but that's the same image how American people should react to their machinations.
So
they're angry with American people who don't abide to their expectations of them. They're 10 times more angry with Russian people. They can't impose the same sanctions, but in a way, with tax cuts and reducing social safety net, they already imposing sanctions on your own populations. It's just they can impose 10 times, 100 times more cruel sanctions on Russian populations, but the dynamic the same. They don't understand majority of people. They don't understand working class. And when they see that history doesn't go the way that they would expect it to go, they throw a temper tantrum, and that punish us. They punish your working class with neoliberal policies. They punish us they punish Iranians. They punish the rest of the world. So going back to Russia, of course, Russian people sometimes with the wrong justification provided with Putin's propaganda and so on, but they get exactly the right picture.
Real quickly. I did hear that there's a difference between the way propaganda works in the United States and the way propaganda works in Russia. It's more naked in Russia, is what I've been told. So the people know that this is all coming from the Kremlin and this is the state line. Whereas in the U.S., we think although it's owned by like 3 corporations. We think that it's actually competitive. So is that a fair distinction, or do people think it's the truth there and people think it's the truth here and it's just the same mess?
Well, because Kremlin propaganda is so ubiquitous, I don't think that it being perceived as Kremlin's propaganda. It's just the base picture of reality, our picture of reality, language, main Russian-speaking language discourse.
Okay.
And everything else, so everyone have their own base picture of the world in the back of their head. So, and because of ubiquitous nature of Russian propaganda, it's builds the main picture of the reality. So through main channels, mass channels of like popular TV shows like Russian Voice that you mentioned and so on, they translated that normal picture and Kremlin picture are the same.
Okay.
Exactly the same way as the picture of reality that been translated through MSNBC and CNN for American liberal audience, or Fox News for American conservative audience, becoming a default picture.
Okay.
So they don't think it like, well, here's the reality of Fox, here's the reality of CNN. They think of that here's the reality, and here's the opposing narrative from Fox if you're liberal, from CNN if you're conservative. And from liberal, if you regular Russian citizens, from the Western liberals and so on.
Okay.
And I know you laugh when I mention refer to my mother, my relations with my mother, but it was a kind of new revelation for me lately when we for the last time was talking about what she heard on TV, that she used to my critique of Putin's regime. It goes on for decades, so she knows that I am quite of opposition views. I don't go further to not disturb her, but maybe it was, I'm not sure, but it sounds like it was the first time when talking with me about my opposition views, she called it Western views. So she always saw my opposition to Putin's regime as like some kind of annoying teenager thing, teenager rebellion and so on. So she was like an older adult who watching, oh, your contrarian child and so on. That was the main attitude for years.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, but it sounds like it was, I hear for the first time that she mentioned that it's, I'm not just a contrarian child. I'm the contrarian child who parroting Western talking points.
Huh.
That wasn't new.
That's new.
And
that is new.
Yes. So I believe, and that's, I believe, a direct result of escalation that coming from the West. Because right now you cannot ignore the fact that propaganda says that the West out there to get us, because the West is literally out there to get us.
Yeah, the West is. Yeah, we say we're out there to get Putin, but we're out there to get Russia, and that's a problem in ways that I don't even think.
It's literally true. It's literally true, and propaganda of Putin's propaganda being completely vindicated for the first time for 20 years. And you can see how it only strengthened the Putin's position. I mean, Russia being weakened. Russian institution, any hope of Russian descent from inside the country being completely destroyed. But on these rubbles, Putin's regime getting only stronger.
I wouldn't underestimate the amount of Russophobia in the United States just because of propaganda. Because that was the way that the Democrat, one of the parties in the US, attacked Trump. That was the only thing they could say about him. Well, he's in with Putin, he's in with Russia. And when it didn't really, like, it was irrelevant.
I wouldn't overestimate it too, because it seems to me as a very, very typical, archetypical image of the other.
Right.
And you just dress this other to a culturally relevant name to the moment, but this image have nothing to do with the real otherness. So it has nothing to do with Russians. I mean, there is some universal image of the other. In Russia, it's the West. In the American liberal circles, it's the Russia. It's the same other that exists in the heads of the people.
Right.
It just have different avatars. And when you change the circumstances, I mean, why it's important? If there was like pre-existing Russophobia, if you change Russian situation, like completely change Russian regime or completely change American political situation, Russophobia will still exist, right?
Exactly.
Because if it was about Russians, but because it's about this other image of the other, that needed in these current political circumstances in Russia and in America. When you change the circumstances in America, when you change the circumstances in Russia, this image will dissolve immediately. There is no, I don't see how it would exist. Like some, I mean, this is the difference. This is actually my favorite topic to talk about, the philosophical difference between essentialist point of view and materialist point of view. I mean, essentialist point of view, they all about that this existing Platonic ideas, that there is the idea of Russia that exists, and some people hated this idea. Materialist worldview is quite the opposite. I mean, it is the root of any difference between political fractions and so on. Materialist view said that provides the understanding that it's all about the circumstances. In different circumstances, different archetypes, different scenarios plays out. And right now, this scenario plays out. You change the circumstances, it becomes irrelevant. I mean, there is definitely. I mean, sorry, I just finished this. There is definitely Russophobia right now exists. It's in action. I can't call. I detested this word before, but right now you can't call this anything else but Russophobia. But this is a circumstantial Russophobia, not essential Russophobia. If you change the circumstances first from the West, because it's coming from the West, there won't be a phenomenon that you can call Russophobia again. So it's just a phenomenon that exists not because the pre-existing Russophobia, but because circumstances created it. So right now Russophobia exists, but it was created and it will dissolve the moment that circumstances that its creation will change.
So I'm trying to think about what could happen internally in the US that would strengthen Russian democratic institutions. What could we do to ourselves, or maybe in relationship to you, that would actually strengthen?
You should strengthen your own democracy.
So we strengthen our democracy.
I mean, I thought about this a lot. I just put it out there, just concrete institutional political policy advice for you. I mean, I believe I will explain it later, I hope, but I know that the answer to systemic racism in one word, in two words, abolish Senate. If you abolish, because the root of the systemic racism, I mean, if you go, I actually wrote about it in Russian, but if you go to the history of systemic racism, why Senate exists, I'm pretty sure you're aware in details of this. It was created to institute systemic racism. And the filibuster and so on, everything about Senate was created and exists only to continue this systemic racism. When I mean, it won't happen overnight, but when you abolish Senate and make America one chamber parliament from the House, you have to expand House, of course, you should expand the House. It's too small right now, historically speaking. Not overnight, but in a generation, you will see systemic racism dissolving, because the biggest institutional power that ties the whole systemic racism thing together is Senate right now.
Yeah.
So you should, yes.
No, I think that's really good to think of the Senate as fundamentally an anti-democratic institution that's obstructing the work that the House could do to further democracy, and the one chamber House could do to further democracy. That's actually,
I mean, if you go even deeper in the history of parliaments, you will see that the two chamber parliaments always were created as anti-democratic. So there was like House of Commons, democratic
House
institutions,
of Lords,
House of Lords to control this democratic institution. There is no other reason for House of Lords, upper chamber, to exist than to constrain democratic impulses. So you need to go further in institutional terms. I mean, it's quite easy actually. If you think this through, you need to just destroy upper bodies of the parliament in every country, leave the broad one chamber parliament, house in your case, just expanded. So it was like more people represent smaller parts of the population and give them ultimate lawmaking power. So it also implies abolishing presidency, and that's it. So you have only house. But I mean, in general, yes, upper house of the parliament everywhere is anti-democratic explicitly. They created to be anti-democratic, so to be the systems. But in the US case, they also explicitly racist because the whole history creating of the union. And I mean, I think your founding fathers, they did a great job in terms of negotiating the agreement that would hold 13 states together. And they made the necessary compromises, hard compromises, but it was for the better. So, but they created a problem that should be resolved, and it was partially resolved, started to be resolved in 18 years later during the Civil War, because there was a second-class citizens, non-citizens, basically. And you are still, historically speaking, in the process of the resolution of it. And you will, the problem was created, it was temporary solution, Senate was created to keep the states together. But right now, you don't need to keep the states together, you formed a nation, and you will finish the project that your founding fathers started when democratic project, because some of them, of course, were not very democratic. But if you want the democratic side of them to win and finish their project, you need this temporary institution of presidency and Senate. Historically speaking, I believe they are temporary. Abolish completely and expand the House and leave like 1,000 people of the House that will have ultimate legislative power and control of the complete control over, of course, judicial power and executive power. So
you think the minister system where the executive emerges from the House is preferable as an institution?
Yes, yes. I believe that. Let's say I don't believe. I disappoint in the whole division of power systems, because division of power systems is actually it's more, like say, complicated system that serves the same purpose of status quo, preserving status quo. So I mean, the upper body of the parliament, it's more explicit institution that preserves the status quo. Division of the power, because of blocking of any kind of radical change, and radical change, of course, from the standpoint of the elite. So any change for status quo, that's what radical change means. Division of the power blocks any radical change, so it serves, subsequently, it serves to, conversely, it serves to status quo. And we see right now, again, in America, America is actually a great example to look for this, because you were built from the scratch, you were built from your constitution, so you don't have this all pre-existing historical conditions and traditions, institutions like Europe. So you can see how this idea plays out in like a purest experiment possible. You see how capitalism plays out, you see how this idea of division of power, republicanism plays out, and you see how when it plays out long enough, the division of powers completely paralyzes the system. When the presidency took over the foreign policy and wars that should be controlled by the House, and you have absolutely unconstitutional amount of power by judicial system, because again, it all serves the logic of preservation of status quo, because if house becoming the threat to status quo, you need to move power away from house, and luckily enough you have this division of power. You have two other branches where you could move the power, move the weight center of the masses of the power, so you can block these radical changes, and that's how your system became completely permanently stuck for decades legislatively.
Yeah,
It's not about only. It's not about only Senate. It's all about division of power. But if you are looking at it with broad brushes, you can say that it's quite easy. I mean, it's easier to said than done, but it's quite easy. You should abolish presidency, abolish Senate, expand the House, like twice of the size at least, and don't be afraid of 1,000 members
I like
house,
that.
and put them as an ultimate expression of the will of the majority. Give them the ultimate power of the, of course, executive and judicial branches. Because if you have only one chamber of the parliament that directly, well, not directly, but indirectly, but with one additional step expresses the will of the majority, of course, they should have say over the executive policies, over judicial policies, because it's literally the will of the people. And right now, Senate and presidency obstructing this will. So in terms of when American democracy will strengthen, when you remove these shackles on your democracy, when you will be able to go to the situation when the majority supported policies will become from the impossible wish list to reality, when you build the system. I mean, I explained in my view how should system that will provide the realization of the wish list, but it doesn't matter if you build another system that will execute this wishes of the majority, so it will be a democratic system. When you build it, you will do the best that you can possibly do for the Russia and for the rest of the world, because
so that's what, real quick, I want to interject. The idea is that if we secure our democratic institutions and make reforms to make our nation more representative of the will of the people, somehow the nation will be less predatory.
Exactly. I mean, it's not that we need exactly the world needs your help. The world needs less your military and political intervention. But I'm pretty sure that the democratic United States of America, truly democratic Europe, will much more likely implement and vote for some kind of Marshall Plan for post-Putin's Russia instead of another shock therapy. Because I'm pretty sure that people, the majority of the people of any country, America, Russia, will anytime, anywhere vote for shock therapy for themselves, and they definitely won't vote for shock therapy for anyone else, for any other country. So this option will be out of the table if you have the true democracy in your country. And I'm pretty sure that a true democratic country and the majority represented will much more likely definitely won't vote for another shock therapy for post-Putin Russia, and very likely will vote for another Marshall Plan for post-Putin Russia, and that's what all we need. So the best that America could do for Russia and for the rest of the world and for Ukraine is to do the work on yourself. That's it.
That's actually a great way to. I gotta go because I got the kids. But thank you for your time. No, I like the idea that we're ending it. The best thing that America could do for Russia is work on our own institutions, make them more democratic. Because if we do so, we'll be less likely to impose more austere and brutish sanctions or just policies in general onto other countries. And insofar as our relations with them will be, I don't know, we'll have a different culture about them. Because right now, insofar as the US is trying to sustain its own oligarchy, we end up reproducing oligarchies in the countries that we deal with, or being predators on them, because that's what oligarchs do. They feed.
Because you're the biggest power in the world. You, of course, whatever going on is within the geopolitical system, affect the rest of the world. I mean, so yes, the best that you could do for Russia is to do the work on yourselves.
Good. All right. Well, thank you for your time.
By the way, when
Yes.
you're finishing, can I plug in some stuff
Yeah.
really quick?
What's going on?
Because I just really started to do this thing that I'm doing right now. I mean, I was dreaming about it for years, but right now I'm starting and I want to go full time, which is hard. And I need support of the community. So
good.
Patreon, Substack, and actually, if any crypto bros are watching you out there, I would need their help too, because I can't actually monetize no Patreon, no Substack because of the sanctions. So the content will be completely free there. I mean, I appreciate my patrons. I wish there will be more, but right now money there, I just accumulate for the better future. I can't withdraw them.
Right.
So my Substack writings also will be for free for a while because of the financial blockade. So in terms of immediate support of my work and living, I would appreciate some crypto bros chipping in. And I mean, that's the best case you can possibly make for the crypto. I mean, it's a necessity right now because of the sanctions. I'm not a big fan of the whole scam economy, but sorry for crypto bros. But right now, I will appreciate the help of the community because through this means, because it's really necessary for me for really turning this as a kind of full-time advocacy for socialism, really.
So how do they get to you through cryptocurrency?
I mean, I will share you my crypto to add into description, but also my Twitter, Egor Kotkin, my Patreon and Substack, Egor Kotkin, everywhere there. My crypto wallets, Bitcoin, Ethereum are right there. So I'll appreciate the help from the community, but it's a necessity, not the goal of my work.
But he needs to eat too. So once again, Egor Kotkin, he has a Substack, he has a Patreon, you said? If you
Yes,
just put
I appreciate pledges from the patrons, but right now they are just accumulating for the future. Right now, so most of the content will be free for a while. But I hope that when the patrons will grow up, the number of patrons will grow up, like much money to withdraw sometimes in the future. That will be make my soul warm thinking about that.
And I know he's also on Medium because I've read a few of his pieces. So if you put his name in Medium, a few of his recent articles, I think he just write those.
Same address. So right now all the content will be for free because I wanted it to be free, and there is no point for me to. There is no way to me for even part of it to be built under the paywall. So it will be for free. I will appreciate any kind of immediate support in crypto. I will appreciate patrons, and I immensely appreciate free subscribers on Substack and followers on Twitter, because the most important thing for me is to spread the message. I have a very explicit agenda. I don't hide it. It's goes above me, and I follow this agenda.
Good. No, I support Egor, and I think you should too. Go, find him on Substack. So actually, there are a few pieces you've written. Name some titles, because it's a diverse kind of group of essays on political theory that you put together. One was on the shock therapy versus the Marshall Plan. There was another one that I thought that was actually pretty interesting.
What the West gets wrong about Russia, about Russian history?
Good.
I mean, my best writings are actually many of the things that I was talking with you about, like American political system analysis of your history, analysis of your constitutional history, and this advice that I deduced from this, like if you want to abolish systemic race, abolish Senate. It's like that. This all is done in my Russian writings, so I'm fully intended to translate it in English, and so there is much more to come. But the most interesting work done in the language that you can read.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to put some of this work in the description of this video, and thank you. And we'll see you again. Take care.
I mean, thank you. My pleasure. I'm grateful for the invitation and big fan of your appearances on the Breaking Points and Rising. Actually,
Thank you.
you actually gave me the confidence to go on the show and rant uninterruptedly for 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'll tell you real quickly. They often say when you go on a show like that, you should talk as if you've been there before and you should be composed. But I go in with the other attitude. I go in there and talk like they're never going to have me back ever again. And this is my one shot. So I just have to get it all out there. It's depending on who you talk to, that is immature, but you never know if you're going to go back. So
I think if I've been cut off because I'm talking too long, I don't think it's my problem because I was talking too long. It's their problem because they didn't have much time, and it all depends on how much substance you have. If you provide people some substance, they won't be angry with you that you were talking too long. They will be angry with them that you cut you off shortly. So it all works out fine for me.
good. Thanks a lot, Egor. I will talk to you at another time. Bye.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye.